So are you, with everything going on in our world right now, with the pandemic, racial justice issues, mental health disorders, are you seeing a greater strain on youth mental health since the pandemic has started?
Yeah, we've already gotten some preliminary statistics about it. For example, we now know if you're between the ages of 18 and 24, 25% of that population has seriously considered suicide during the pandemic. So we
Wow.
already know that. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey stats right now are not updated, but I think they'll reflect that too. We now know that 40% of adults say they have a mental health challenge, where it used to be 25%. So we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing this. We know that 26% of adults say that it's a traumatic time they're living through, and
Yeah.
11% of adults say now they've seriously considered suicide. And that was in the CDC report in June. So we're seeing preliminary numbers about that, but we already know it. We sense it in ourselves and the
Yeah.
people we work with. And of course, youth are impacted because they have highly reactive brains.
Yep. Yeah, that's so true. And you kind of just you touched on this, but even prior to the pandemic, we were seeing youth struggle with mental health issues, and some just experiencing enormous amounts of stress from schoolwork, having jobs on top of that, studying. You know, their brains are still developing, so all those social dynamics and relationships. You did touch on this, but how has 2020 changed that? How are some people going from experiencing stress, which is a normal, I think, reaction to experience sometimes, and stress can sometimes be healthy, it motivates us, but I think that we're going from more stress towards anxiety and depression. So are you seeing a change from stress to anxiety and depression?
Yes. So let's talk broadly, and let's start with suicide, and we'll end up with anxiety. So in 2019, for the first time in a decade, suicide rates have decreased. It was amazing. We were
Mm-hmm.
unprepared for that. And then COVID hit. I think it is going to be where they are going to explode. And of course, with that, part of the suicide equation is depression and anxiety, which tend to go hand in hand. So I
Mm-hmm.
always think about stress. I define it this way: that tiger's in front of you that's going to eat you, that's just darn stressful.
Yes.
And anxiety is someone has taken away that tiger. That tiger can't hurt you in any way, but you still can't eat, can't sleep, can't have joy. That's what anxiety is. What we're dealing with now is stress and anxiety. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm anxious sometimes when I'm in my home, very safe, watching the news. And we know that anxious kids don't think as well, don't hear as well, don't learn as well, don't really feel joy to the degree, and really shut down. And this is
Yeah.
where parents really have to dig in and understand that anxiety is real. That kid laying down on that couch is maybe a lazy kid in part, but mostly that's an anxious kid. They don't want to interact with the world. And parents and kids need to learn about anxiety, because we now know that at least a third of the population say they have anxiety. That's just enormous. If
Yeah.
I told you a third of the population had anything, ate hot dogs every day, you'd say, oh, well, we need to really look at that. So we really need to dig in and understand what anxiety is. We haven't talked about anxiety in schools. We've talked about suicide, but we haven't talked about anxiety, and we have to develop not only a language but a comfort with that.
Mm-hmm. That is so true. And what are some things that adults, whether it's a parent, guardian, coach, teacher, can look for in youth that are signs that a young person is experiencing anxiety? And if you could also answer it in terms of anxiety and depression, that would be great.
Yeah, so any kind of major change in behavior, and I always think of my son Jake, who's really a lovely kid. When he's anxious, he's not so lovely. He's rude, he's defiant. When I am anxious, I am a different person. I am not feeling in control, and I really drive the people around me a little bit nuts. So anxiety is a lot about learning to live with the discomfort. So people who have anxiety and think, well, I want to get rid of this, it's a great thought, but it's magical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly kids, when they're in school, they have this magical thinking: when I get out of Norwood High School, like, it'll be better. This place sucks. When I go to college and working, it'll be better. It's not. It's magical thinking. So we really have to learn about it. And here are some of the signs that we have to look at. For someone observing any kind of significant change in sleeping, in eating, in relating. If you have a child that is nasty all of a sudden, that is a sign of anxiety. That is a sign that they have been disrupted so much that they are disrupting things around them. Mm-hmm. And of course, anxiety and depression go hand in hand, as I say. If you're anxious all the time, it's just darn, depressing. It's exhausting. Yeah. And people who are anxious are not in the room. Like you and I are talking. I know we're remote now, but we're talking.
Yeah.
An anxious person is not in the moment. They're thinking about tomorrow. They're thinking about the mistakes they made yesterday. And living in the moment is a very positive thing. It really is a protective factor when we think about anxiety, but anxious people have a hard time living in the moment. They're thinking about all the catastrophic things that could happen down the line.
Wow. I feel like with all of the stress and anxiety that even adults are feeling during this pandemic, it might be difficult for a parent or guardian or other adult in the community to even notice that, because they could be experiencing it themselves and can't even acknowledge, not even can't, but don't have the tools to acknowledge that it's also happening to them. So how can adults take care of themselves? How can adults put their oxygen mask on first so they're better able to recognize these signs in youth and help youth?
Yeah, it's a great example you use. We've heard that on a plane. Remember the days we used to get on a plane? Not so much anymore, but it says put your mask on first, and that's really important. A lot of parents ask me, I'm anxious, should I talk to my children about my anxiety? I don't know if I should tell them. And I always kind of laugh inside because I say, oh, believe me, your kids know you're anxious. They live with you for like 15 years. They know all about your anxiety.
Yep.
We want to talk to our kids about our own anxiety to inform them, but not to burden them. That's such an important differentiation. And I really tried to live it. I wasn't always successful, but I really tried to live it around anxiety to inform my kids about that sort of thing. So that's number one. And we have to model behavior. And some of that modeling is how you deal with anxiety in a positive way.
Yep.
We have to learn those things. And the thing that parents have to avoid is saying the wrong thing. We're constantly saying the wrong thing. I know I did. Saying to a kid, like, I know how you feel, is about the worst thing you can say. We have no idea how they feel. Everyone experiences anxiety very differently. So we have to understand that. And so good conversations happen when parents say to their kids, tell me what's going on with you. Tell me how you're feeling. What would have to happen in your life to make you feel a little bit less anxious? Let's ask them instead of telling them and prescribing what would be better for them.
And I would even go so far as to say that any adult can ask youth. So a teacher could practice that in their classroom. A coach could practice that before a practice, although I'm not really sure if sports are even happening right now. But
it's a really good point. And for teachers who have kids who are not achieving in a certain way, it's probably anxiety or depression or some combination thereof. There's a reason for it. I always say whatever kids do, they do for a reason and a good reason to them. So let's, instead of just looking at the baseline behavior, I think about an iceberg and think about that part on the top. You might not like that behavior. Maybe a kid is rude or defiant or not achieving academically or athletically, as you said. But let's look below the iceberg. There are always reasons why.
Yes, exactly. We say it a lot in prevention work, the root causes. So, yep. Sorry to get jargony, but for our listeners, but you explained it quite well. So what are some pieces of advice that you have if an adult notices a youth is experiencing like an immediate maybe panic attack or anxiety attack, a mental health crisis? What are some things that adults can do to help that?
Let's talk about the two of them separately because they're very separate.
Sure.
So a panic attack, I think you've heard me tell the story before, Aubrey. I'll tell the story about my wife when she had a panic attack.
Yes.
So this might be helpful to you. And then I'm going to update it to me. So she had a panic attack. It's about 2 years ago. And she woke up at 5:28 in the morning in full panic mode saying she has to go to the hospital. She's having a heart attack. And I had been through this before. And even though I adore my wife, I abandoned her immediately. And I ran down to the kitchen to get ice cubes. And I had her hold ice cubes because I needed to recalibrate her brain. Anyone who's in full panic mode, and panic can only last 20 or 25 minutes. Our bodies are not equipped to deal with it beyond that. So after about 15 minutes, her anxiety was going down. Her hands were freezing.
Yeah.
I was recalibrating her brain, and she complained to me. She says, my hands are freezing. Let me tell you, about 6 or 8 weeks ago, my computer crashed. This is how I live now.
Yeah.
I was in full panic mode. I got up from my own chair and I grabbed some ice cubes and was holding it because I needed to recalibrate our brain. So the first thing we have to understand is that panic attacks are really not about talking then, it's about talking after. And we have to debrief. And I did that with my wife, and I did it with myself, like what could have been done differently. When we focus on the things that we can't control in life, that is disempowering. Like, oh my goodness, it's overwhelming. When I felt better, in my case, is when I called up Dell and I had them fix my computer. I felt better. I felt even better when I ordered a new computer because I really needed a new computer. So let's focus in on anxiety and action, which means we're making a decision to further us along. I was gaining control of that situation. I felt a heck of a lot better.
Yeah. And I have to say, I heard you tell that story about your wife. You did a virtual presentation for Impact Norwood. I forget what month, but towards the beginning of the pandemic. And I struggle with anxiety, and I had a panic attack maybe 2-3 months ago. And I said to my boyfriend, I need ice cubes. And he got me ice cubes, and I held them in my hand, and it worked. Like, I was able to, that was the only thing I could think about. I could only think about how cold those ice cubes were in my hand. So thank you for that.
So important, Aubrey. Here you are, a professional, doing the important things you're doing, and you're modeling some really good behavior. So this is an important thing. I always say, if you broke your leg, would you wait 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, or never to get help? That's ludicrous. That's what we do around anxiety and depression, and we don't talk about it in the same way. Exactly. If a kid has a broken arm, they're going in, kids are, pre-COVID, they're signing the cast, a kid's making up some incredible story about it, but we don't share about anxiety. And I think what you just did now is so important, because people will still see you as professionals, capable, but you're also a person.
Yeah, exactly. And I wish I wore my sweatshirt today, but excuse me, I have a sweatshirt that I've been rocking a lot lately that says it's okay to not be okay all the time. So I try to wear that on the days when there are stressful things going on, just to remind myself that it's okay to not be okay.